Okay, this is a super brief review of Chapter 3, Writing for Social Scientists, One Right Way. So this is a supplemental reading for this week, and while, I just wanted to kind of touch upon some of the main arguments from the reading that I found very helpful that I hope will support your learning in this class. Okay, so first, he talks about how most students learn to do just enough to fulfill an assignment, but rarely actually work to their full potential. Right? Part of this has to do with just the structure of college and the fact that, you only have so much time to do everything, right? But oftentimes this is just a failure of planning or time management to really work to our full potential, right? He also says that most students learn to do their best on the first pass of a paper and never even consider revisions. So I know I was pretty much that when I was an undergrad. I didn't really see it that way, or I would revise like paragraph by paragraph. And that can be a helpful strategy, but that's not going to be the same as spending time just strictly revising your paper, right? Just sitting down just to make sure that it all kind of gels together, that it works right. Plus, you had to find the strategies that work well for revising. We'll talk about that later as well. I know for myself personally, I work well creating papers on computers, but I don't work well editing them on computers. So I often prefer to print out a paper that I'm working on and edit it that way, because sometimes, I don't know what it is, maybe I'm just old, but the tactile sense of the page, it helps me see it better, plus it helps me orient where things are in a paper. So for instance, if I want to, move one section of the literature review to another, I can kind of visually see it better in a physical paper than when you're just scrolling through pages on Microsoft Word or something. But again, you have to work with what works best for you. So if most people are just doing a first pass of their paper, then that's a really easy place to change your strategy and improve your papers, right? It's just make sure you're actually revising. So there's also this issue where students get an impression that professionals do things once, and then they're done after doing it once. So they assume that someone who's a professional writer, or someone just even who, does any sort of paid writing for a living, that somehow they don't do drafts, right? Or they don't spend a lot of time and energy crafting what they produce. They're just good at it. That's why they do it. Nope. Like, writing is a journey. It's a process, no matter who's doing it. Right? I think, as I had said before about like Hemingway, like it does bad things to some people, right? But it's because oftentimes the writing can come to control us when we let it get involved in our kind of emotional well-being, instead of controlling it by kind of breaking it up into manageable ways that we can get it done, right? So since a lot of students think that professionals don't have to, make an outline, don't have to spend time revising, it can warp their sense of how they should be preparing their own papers, right? So that's something I like to dispel in the beginning of this class, is the idea that writing is so easy for someone else, right? Some people have more writing strengths than others, right? Some people might have some, strengths in that way. But ultimately, even if writing is something that you love, that you're passionate about, it's still not easy if you want to produce something that's, that you're very happy with. So there's also not one right way to do something, right? So this is where he gets that one right way argument from, that educational institutions do not do a good job of explaining the work that's needed to truly create great papers. People are taught there's a cookie cutter method that works for everyone, but somehow it's just not working for them, and that it's their fault, right? Kind of really ties in with our, talk about sociology, with our American individualism culture, right? That kind of puts all the blame of any problem on the individual instead of actually looking at the structure of the institutions. So, if students are getting taught from the institution that, the priority is on producing work, but not giving yourself the structured time to do it, and if they don't see any of the professors, the mentors, anyone being real about the work that's involved, it can create this kind of false sense that you're the only one struggling And so people often don't reach out for help or support. Like we have the Writing Center and other writing services. But oftentimes people don't reach out to those things just because they think they're not good at writing, right? When ultimately, it's not something you're just magically good at. It's something just like anything else. You have to put a lot of time and practice into, and you just keep getting better, right? So he goes on this rant after that in the chapter about the right way, producing this idea of the right sentence or the perfect sentence, which makes the writing process torturous, right? This idea of like, I can't move on until this sentence is perfect. That's why you're supposed to just draft something, come back and revise, draft it again, come back and revise, so that you can give your brain enough time to just like focus on the creative stuff of, is this the right word? Or do I like this illustration I'm providing? And then come back with the revision and be like, do I need all these words, right? Or what can go from that sentence to provide more clarity? So it's going back and forth that really does that, right? So, he is right when he says that it's torturous when you try and do that perfect sentence, right? So he also explains how to make an effective introduction by laying out a roadmap for the reader of what's to come, instead of being vague and giving out facts in a piecemeal fashion. Then he says, if you don't have a clear idea of where the paper's going, you can start early drafts with the vague introduction and later clarify with specifics. So if you're not starting with the introduction, where do you start? Well, anywhere you like, right? He points out you won't know until you start doing it. So he suggests using that free writing as a way to develop sections of your paper. So once you start and you don't burst into flames, then you realize it's not as hard as it seems. It's just a matter of putting in the work, of cutting the bigger thing into chunks and then taking each chunk at a time and getting it done. Right? So then he talks about paper organization and how much stress people put into it when there's really not a right way to do it. He suggests ways to organize, complete with an illustration, but typically you wouldn't be tacking up note cards to the wall, right? You'd probably be using Microsoft Word. You can tell the chapter was written like a couple decades ago, but just by his specific references to technology. But he has such an important argument, right? That really you have to pull yourself out of there's a right way and somehow you don't know it, right? Obviously you have to look at the assignment for any details or instructions or things like that, but ultimately it's about just getting the work done and starting the work, because it's almost like a snowball, right? You get that momentum going and it can really, become a lot bigger and build upon itself. It's just that oftentimes when it comes to writer's block, it's just a fear or confusion about where to start, right? So it seems obvious, but the real guide is, if you want to do it, just do it, right? Like I listened to one of the 1,000 podcasts I was listening to was one that's hosted by Chris Hardwick, and he always says that about stand-up comedy. Like, you want to do stand-up comedy? How do you get into it? He's like, people always come up to him and say, how do I get into stand-up? And he says, how to do stand-up? You just do it, right? Writing is the same way. How do I write? How do I start writing? You just start writing by writing. Do the brain dump, that free writing exercise. Do the outline. Then fill in little chunks of the outline. Just get started, better or worse, and it will actually eventually become a paper by magic. No, I'm just kidding. It's not magic. It's the work, the diligence, the time you're putting in over time makes it an effective paper.